G'day, and welcome to TD Physics as we explore the ear, artillery, and the history of Passchendale.
Today's story comes from Quebec. Our soldier Joseph Labouliere from St. Paul's Bay, Quebec, enlisted in 1914, sufficiently early that he earned the regimental number 97, which makes him approximately the first 100 soldiers to sign up for World War I. So, born in 1893, he signed up by November 1914, which is very, very early for Canadians in the war. He's 21. I think that's his legit age. Doesn't seem to be corrected anywhere later. He's 6 feet tall, 6.5 if we're really picky about our records here. And he had a pale complexion, dark gray eyes, and brown hair. Ultimately, he joins the Canadian Expeditionary Force and joins the Heavy Battery.
The British or Canadian field guns came in a couple of calibers. Medium looked like this, but our soldier joined the heavy barrage, and they look like this. This was pre-mechanization for the guns, and they were pulled by horses. That will matter later in our story. Our story is officially about ears, so what does that have to do with anything? Well, these guns were loud, and if you look closely, our soldiers wear ear protection while performing their duties. Hearing loss was a very common aspect of being a part of the artillery. And today we're going to look at how the ear works.
The ear. What does this have to do with gunnery? Well, soldiers tended to do loud things. That tended to make them lose their hearing. And so we need to understand how the ear works to help protect and then compensate for hearing loss. So number one, that very outside flap of your skin and cartilage outside is called a pinna. Technically not your ear, the whole system is the ear. And its job is to act like a satellite dish to collect the sound energy from around it and to focus it in to the auditory canal, which is number two. The auditory canal's job is to bring all that concentrated sound energy to the eardrum, also known as the tympanic membrane. It also makes wax and protects. So how do these two things pertain to gunnery? Well, our pinna, the big flap of cartilage, basically if you damage your hearing, you can compensate a little bit by kind of holding your hands like an extension of your ears and make a bit of a half circle or a cup around it. And that'll collect extra sound energy, go down into the canal, and you'll be able to hear a bit more. Or more importantly, hopefully you like the couple gunners you could see in the more modern artillery video clip, have hearing protection. And the auditory canal's job of making wax keeps dust and dirt out of our ears. And it was a very dirty place in the time of war, in the trenches and in the artillery sections. So having something to collect all that particulate matter helped keep your eardrum safe. And then we get to the eardrum itself. It is so important to manage pressure. So large explosions can cause a rupture of the eardrum. You'll hear ringing. It'll be very painful. This is also something I'm familiar with in the context of scuba diving. If you want to manage pressure, well, we'll get to that under eustachian tubes. So the tympanic membrane's job is to collect the vibrations in the air that are in the auditory canal and to transport it to the ear bones, which are just inside, called ossicles. Managing pressure we'll get to, like I said, for number 7. So these first three are the outer ear. They're air-filled, and basically that membrane acts as the boundary between the outer and middle ear. But our sections in blue are also in air almost all the time, unless you get an ear infection, and those are awful. And an ear infection during wartime was really serious, and if you didn't get it checked out, it could go away on its own, or you could die. And that was the terrifying thing of existing prior to antibiotics. So what's the job of these bones? You got 3 bones, the malleus, incus, and the stapes. And these bones were unknown to science, at least to Western science, until someone took apart an elephant, after the time that we appreciated comparative animal physiology. that we have similar bones to bats and to whales in terms of rough approximation of spines and ribs and limbs. But obviously the bones that make up a blue whale's fins are going to be different from those that make up our fingers. But they're still roughly the same position relative to one another. And so it was in taking apart an elephant where they found these tiny little bones where they said, hey, let's go look for those in humans. And they found them. Have two jobs. One of them is to transmit energy from the vibrating tympanic membrane or eardrum over to the cochlea. And so that's their job. But they have a secondary job. When your body anticipates a loud bang, it actually pulls these bones back a little bit so that the full force of the rushing pressure wave doesn't actually get transmitted all the way to the deep part of your head into the cochlea. It helps save your hearing. The eustachian tubes, that's number 7 here. So your eustachian tubes are part of balancing out pressure. It's a tube that connects to the back of your throat, and it's often closed, but if you swallow or you gently pinch your nose and blow against it, what can happen is that it'll pop it open. It's important that you blow gently. A very vigorous blowing could create that super pressure difference, which could rupture and cause a lot of pain. Eustachian tubes, good for managing pressure. Now, as we move to the inner ear, these are filled with a type of liquid called lymph, and it is a liquid that's part of your body and is essential. In the semicircular canals, as you move your head around, up, down, left, right, and side to side, in any of those dimensions where you're saying nodding yes, nodding no, or being spun, in either case, your body, even if your eyes are closed, can tell that you've done that, and that all comes from your inner ear. You have tiny little hairs that exist on the edges of the semicircular canals, and if you suddenly turn your head one way or the other, the fluid stays more or less the same, Newton's laws, but those hairs will be affected by that almost stationary fluid, and so they'll bend in one direction, and your brain interprets that as, hey, I'm moving, I'm accelerating. There are a couple weird things. If you spin around enough, you can get the fluid inside these going fast enough that when you try to walk straight, everything looks kind of at an angle and you feel nauseous. So dizzy. I have no real good connection to gunning on this one. But the cochlea is important. And so there are a whole bunch of tiny hairs. Okay, so the cochlea looks a little bit like a snail. And there are tiny little hairs all along it. And each of these hair-like structures responds to a unique frequency. So if you have lost your hearing, you either need to get people to yell louder. You can get a cochlear implant where wires are attached into your cochlea. And hopefully they last a long time because that's kind of close to brain surgery. And every single one of those hairs can trigger an electrical signal to your brain. So you can hear very complex sounds. And it's the job of the auditory nerve to take it there. If you damage your auditory nerve, you probably took some shrapnel to the head and it's probably really bad. So those are the parts and some aspects to artillery.
So our soldier fought in every major battle that Canada was involved in, including Vimy Ridge. He would have been here at Passchendale, and that's where he lost his life. The Menin Gate that we just saw was dedicated and built to preserve the memory of those who had no known grave in Belgium and who had given their lives in sacrifice for its freedom. And to say thank you, the last post has been played every single night since World War I, with the exception of the occupation by the Nazis. Even during COVID, they still play, just not to a public. And I was able to acquire his medal a few months back, and I treasure it, as it's a powerful story that I wanted to share with you. He is buried in a cemetery not far off, and we found out from his records, remember I said horses would matter? He was bringing his horses to water. He had to make sure those horses were well fed and watered, taken care of, so they could move those large field guns when necessary. And so artillery people would fire at each other. And he was one of a million casualties that died in that horrific battle close to Ypres called Passchendale. And so this is for him.
And so today's video is dedicated to Gunner J.T. Labouliere, who is buried right there, according to the War Graves Commission, almost right next to the cross of sacrifice. Protect your ears, remember your history, know your history, know your physics.